Erin O'Toole lost a confidence vote taken by the federal Conservative caucus on Wednesday that brought an end to his 17-month tenure as leader of the party. He's not the first one who didn't last long. Why is that? With us now for their thoughts from the nation's capital, Ben Woodfinden, who writes the Dominion newsletter on Substack and is a doctoral student in political theory at McGill University. And in Mississauga, Ontario, Tasha Kheiriddin, national political columnist for Postmedia and a principal at the strategy and public affairs firm Navigator. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
I can only imagine how tired you both are. We were talking about it a little bit. But, you know, for the audience who doesn't really pay a lot of attention to politics outside of, say, an election, they might look and say, every time I look, the Canadian Conservatives has a new leader. Why is that? What would you say? Tasha, I'll start with you.
Well, it's been the last 3 election cycles that we've seen this happen. And I think there's a frustration when the Conservatives lose. I think in the last few, part of the frustration has been a sense that they haven't had the right direction and the leader has made mistakes and they've basically made the leader pay for that. I think it's a combination of things, though. I think that also this time around, the caucus didn't feel that it was being respected by its leader. They had some frustrations with how he was running things. So I think that it's really a bit of a combination of those things. I mean, the Conservative Party hasn't always had an eat the leader mentality, but it certainly has one now.
And Ben, Tasha mentioned that, you know, the caucus didn't feel respected by Mr. O'Toole. He campaigned to the right to win the party nomination and then to the center in the general election. And some people felt that alienated their views. Mm-hmm. What would you say to people who do pay attention only at election and say, the Conservatives have yet another leader that I have to learn more about?
Yeah, I think you make a good point that lots of this was to do with kind of how caucus felt, obviously, about O'Toole. O'Toole won his leadership campaigning as, you know, as a self-described true blue Tory, and then he pivoted fairly quickly after winning the leadership. And I think he was probably making a safe gamble there that he wasn't going to be able to win a general election campaigning the exact same way he won the Conservative leadership. So that made sense. But the way the pivot was done, I think it was poorly executed at the time, to be a mild way of putting it. I suspect he probably knew that the gamble that he was making in doing this made this outcome likely. Had they won the election, had they formed government, I think it's quite possible that these things would have been kind of papered over, right? Winning solves lots of problems. But the gamble didn't pay off. Of course, they didn't win. And it was probably only a matter of time, I suspect, in hindsight, that something like this was going to happen.
You know, this is all happening on the backdrop of a pandemic, right? I think there's been so much happening in everyone's lives these past few years. But Tasha, I want to go back to what Ben was saying. You know, some people have called Mr. O'Toole a hypocrite, and some people have said he was trying to be everything to everybody. But isn't this a common political tactic?
Well, I don't know if it's a common political tactic. Brokerage politics or, you know, trying to please different constituencies is something that you do often when you're in government. You know, you have to balance interests. The challenge here is balancing interests within his own party. I think it was a lack of authenticity that was the problem, because it's one thing to, you know, find compromises. And I think previous Conservative leaders, I think of Stephen Harper, for example, on the issue of abortion, found a compromise with the social conservative wing of his party in that he said abortion's off the table as a policy, don't go there, but we're going to do other things in the realm of social conservatism, such as establishing an office for the protection of religious freedoms abroad. So there were things he did to please his constituency without, you know, doing things that he thought would be politically inexpedient. But here you have a situation where Mr. O'Toole did a 180. You know, like Ben said, he went from being the true blue to all of a sudden he was a red Tory or a progressive conservative mold. And so people said, well, you know, that's not authentic. Who are you? And I think that was part of the frustration, more than simply switching positions.
And Ben, Tasha spoke of Mr. O'Toole's authenticity problem, but she also spoke of compromising. Can you win the general election in Canada without the centre?
I think it depends how you define it. I think it's undeniable that the Conservatives are going to have to present some sort of kind of moderate image of themselves to the general population, to the voting population, to win. Where I think maybe there's room for conservatives to kind of still be conservative is it's in some sense it's up to them to kind of decide for themselves what that means, right? I think there was at times it seemed like with O'Toole and his team that they were almost embarrassed to be conservative. They were almost sometimes apologizing for it.
That's interesting, Ben. Sorry, embarrassed. Why?
Well, he said things. I recall towards the end of the election, he said something. O'Toole said something like, "This is not your father's Conservative Party." No, it wasn't. I think at that night actually he was there with Brian Mulroney, which is an interesting thing to say. Well, your father's Conservative Party leader was right there. But I don't think. I think they can present something moderate and serious without necessarily having to become indistinguishable from the Liberals. What the Conservatives are going to have to learn how to do is figure out how to win and how to win while still being conservative, right? They're a Conservative Party for a reason. They've got to figure out how to thread that needle.
You mentioned something about, appealing to the center. And I have to wonder, Mr. Trudeau won 2 elections after the pictures of him came out with him wearing the blackface. By not appealing to the center, are Conservatives making it harder for themselves to be elected, or are they making it easier for the Liberals to win? Tasha?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's not even so much appealing to the center per se, but saying what they are and overlapping a segment of voters who would be prepared to vote Conservative if they felt comfortable with that political club. And I'm thinking here of blue Liberals, people who are sort of in the middle, but share certain principles, including fiscal conservatism, with the Conservative Party. What they react against a lot, we see, especially in the suburbs, and I'm here in Mississauga today, and these types of ridings, is this perception the Conservative Party is intolerant, even racist. It goes back to the 2015, barbaric practices tip line that was in their campaign there that really was a big strike against them, because it raised that specter of hidden agenda or racism that the Conservatives, unfortunately, are often tagged with, and unfairly so. But when they do things like that, it's harder to shake off. So I think, going back to your original question, it's a question of defining themselves, kind of like what Ben said. I mean, who are they? What do they stand for? And Conservatives do stand for principles that appeal, I think, to a wide swath of Canadians, including, incremental change, community, a balance of community and the individual. It's not only about the individual, it is about freedom, but also responsibility. These kinds of things that in the pandemic, I think we've kind of lost a lot of that conversation. It's gone really one way. And I think the Conservatives need to recapture that. It's the tradition of Canadian conservatism.
Tasha, you mentioned the barbaric practices hotline, and I wanted to just kind of stay on that for a second. And this question is to you, Ben. I come from East Africa, from a country called Uganda, and Uganda is a very conservative country. There's very little government intervention. Just Google, it's very socially conservative. Just Google Uganda's gay bill. And there's a lot of people that come from Caribbean countries that are very conservative. But when you look at the Canadian Conservative Party, it's pretty homogenous, with the exception of Dr. Leslyn Lewis. And James Cummings' report found that Erin O'Toole didn't do enough to reach into various immigrant and ethnic communities in Canada. Is that something that the Conservative Party has to address moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's pretty. They're never going to win without being able to do something like this, obviously, and also for principled reasons they should. Like you say, a lot of these immigrant, ethnic, and these diverse communities, a lot of their values in many ways are very small c conservative values, right? These are people the Conservative Party should be able to reach. So the question of why they don't reach these people is something that they need to seriously ask and do some serious soul searching on. I think it's probably, communities are not homogenous, right? It's not. Communities have different interests and different ways of seeing things. So it's not like you can treat all these communities the same. But yeah, like you say, lots of these communities hold like socially conservative, small c conservative values, and tapping into that to the Conservatives isn't just kind of something that they should kind of be, reluctantly doing. It's a treasure trove for them to unlock, right? If they could figure out how to do that, right? If they could figure out how to tap into conservative communities, that might be their path to, becoming a kind of the governing party as opposed to the opposition party.
Tasha, I saw you nodding your head.
Yes, it's something that the Conservative Party has tried to do in the past. Under Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney was the Minister of Immigration. He courted new Canadian communities very avidly. He was known for that. And those efforts were then, like I said, really torpedoed in 2015 when the party, the controversy of the NECAP and the citizenship oath and all that stuff came out. And the party was seen as having a perspective that many Canadians were, they reacted strongly against. Now, that's not to say that some people didn't agree with the NECAB issue, but when they pushed it further with the tip line, that's where they lost a lot of people's votes. And this is something the Conservatives have to wrestle with. I think it's also exacerbated by the populist wave that has swept the entire globe, frankly, and is really here now. I think the protests we've seen in Ottawa have really brought home the fact that this is not going to be a struggle in the next leadership between the traditional factions of the Conservative Party, SoCons and fiscal conservatives and libertarians. There's a new animal on the scene, and it's populism, and it's American-style populism, and it is something that is not part of our tradition. It is very, I would say, almost aggressive in the way that it approaches its anti-government stance. Conservatives are small government, but they're not no government. And I think that, many Canadians will be turned off by what they've seen in the protests because they don't feel comfortable going to where that is. So the Conservatives have to be very careful, I think, as they go forward and have a real honest conversation about what they are. And I do think that unless they move to a more progressive conservative position, they will not form government, as Ben said.
I want to come back to that in a moment. We're going to talk about the Ottawa, what's going on in Ottawa. I mentioned that this has all been happening within a pandemic, 17 months. Ben, was Mr. O'Toole given enough time by his party to become the leader that they needed him to be?
Well, I think that regardless of what you think of O'Toole, there's reason to have some sympathy for him, right? He was elected leader in a leadership election that got postponed during the pandemic. So he was chosen as the leader in, I believe, August 2020, and then basically a year later he's fighting a general election. I don't think he actually met his entire caucus in person until after the most recent election, right? Being opposition leader is tough to begin with. It's a thankless job, but he had an even tougher time of it than most, I think. And so in that sense. I think he personally is probably right to feel aggrieved about kind of the short leash he was given. Whether or not it's a good idea that this rule that the party has kind of informally established for itself now that it's kind of one and done, right? You form government or we select a new leader. That's probably not a good idea for the party to kind of think that way. But this has happened for O'Toole now, and like I said earlier, the gamble he took in the election was if he pivoted and he won. He'd still be leader right now, almost certainly. The pivot didn't work, and he lost, and so now he's out of the job.
You said it's not a good idea for the party itself, but what do you think Canadians who might vote for the Conservatives are thinking by watching all this stuff go down, Ben?
To be honest with you, I'd be shocked if most Canadians were paying too much attention to this. Lots of us kind of tune out between elections. So I don't think the Conservatives are kind of, they've destroyed themselves by doing this on that front. I think maybe something O'Toole could probably feel aggrieved by is that even by the end of the election, I'm not sure that many Canadians actually knew who he was or knew much about him. The next leader, whoever that is going to have to work on that, right? We don't know who if it's Trudeau or someone else that he's facing off against, he or she is facing off against. Trudeau has obviously kind of got the kind of name recognition of the brand that no other politician in this country can compete with. Whoever the next leader is going to have to figure out not only how to kind of make sure Canadians know who they are, but they've got to define who they are for themselves, right? Don't let your opponent paint you as what they want you to be. Get out there early and define who you are on your own terms, not on your opponent's terms.
And Tasha, you mentioned Prime Minister Stephen Harper before. What do you think it was about him that made him able to unify the various factions of the Conservative Party that no leader has been able to do since?
I think a few things. He was a very strong personality. He was very decisive, and he was authentic. I think that's one thing that, that was one of the issues here. With Stephen Harper, you knew what you got. He'd been in public life. He'd been in the Reform Party as an MP, and then he was in the National Citizens Coalition as their president for quite a while. So people knew what they were getting with him. There was no surprise. And he, I think he also, just like I said, had a force of personality that was able to manage people and convince them that, under him, first of all, they won, they could win. But secondly, that he would respect what they had to say or at least hear them out. So I think that unfortunately, he didn't leave much of a legacy. This was the issue. I mean, he was there for 3 terms, but there was no obvious successor. And as a result, you ended up with a lot of infighting. It's still in many ways, is Stephen Harper's party, but Stephen Harper's no longer there. So how will it define itself going forward? It needs that big tent, because he did have a big tent. It wasn't quite as big as Mr. Mulroney's. It didn't include Quebec to the same extent. But that has been the winning formula for Conservatives every time they formed a majority government.
Tasha mentioned the convoy in Ottawa. Ben, you're in Ottawa right now. What, in your view, what role did the trucker convoy play in Mr. O'Toole's unseating?
It undoubtedly played a role. I won't claim to be privy to kind of, internal caucus discussions. But, you could see Mr. O'Toole in I believe it was last week, as the convoy was approaching Ottawa. I think he had, a couple different positions, right? He kept changing. And so this is part of the kind of the authenticity problem that Tasha's talking about here. But I don't necessarily think that's entirely on O'Toole himself. Part of the reason he kept kind of, changing his position was because his caucus was essentially forcing him to, right? You had MPs going out there and actively meeting with and taking pictures with these protesters. And
were they undermining him? Sorry, not to interrupt. Were they undermining him?
I don't know if they were, if that was deliberate or not. I suspect it probably did undermine him. All the reports that have come out about these kind of final caucus meetings is that they were bloodbaths, is the term that's been used, thrown around a couple times. So I think, regardless of what people in the party think about the convoy itself, the divisions over it, the divides over this are undoubtedly, there are bigger fishes in the party, and this is kind of just one little kind of snippet of where these fissures really are starting to emerge.
And Tasha, I think in one of your columns, you described Mr. O'Toole as a dead man walking. It's being said that the truckers' protesters came to Ottawa to topple the Liberal government, but they ended up actually toppling the leader of the opposition. Do you think that they see it that way?
It's interesting you raise that, because, in fact, on Sunday at the press conference that the leaders of the protest had, they said that Mr. O'Toole should step aside and that someone like Pierre Poilievre or Leslyn Lewis would be an appropriate choice to lead the Conservative Party. And then they made it clear they weren't partisan. But at the end of the day, you do have to wonder. There's a very interesting interview that journalist Matt Gurney did with an insider in the Conservative caucus who said that, as Ben said, the caucus meetings have been bloodbaths all January, and that this was kind of a tipping point, that the convoy didn't necessarily come in with that agenda, but it certainly focused everything on the leadership, or the lack thereof, of the response that O'Toole had to the convoy, which wasn't satisfactory, and I think that was a bit of a nail in the coffin. And certainly other people, and the 2 individuals I mentioned, were very active on social media and meeting people. And so you do have to wonder. We're in a leadership now, and they are probably going to be two of the contenders everyone's talking about anyway. But it's events, dear boy. The famous citation. Things can change on a drop of a hat, and now they have.
Ben, Tasha mentioned, we've been talking about some of the members from the Conservative Party who've met with some of the people at this convoy and taken pictures, including interim leader Candice Bergen. What do you think that signals as far as the direction that the party is going?
To be honest, I don't think we know yet. I think a lot of this is going to depend how this convoy plays out and how it ends. And I'm not going to speculate on exactly how that might happen. There is undoubtedly, as Tasha said, there's undoubtedly a kind of a populist moment right now within the base and within the membership more broadly. And if we have a leadership election in the very near future, which we almost certainly will, this is going to play a role in that race. How exactly that plays out, I think, is probably quite unpredictable. And the person who wins may well be the one that can channel that. I don't think the Conservatives should necessarily run away from all of the kind of stuff that we associate with this kind of populist shift. So some of the shifts that we've seen in places like the United Kingdom in the last few years, where we see a kind of shift towards more, let's call them like blue collar, working class people shifting to the right, this kind of realignment. I think there's potential for success there for Conservatives here. These shifts are taking place here too, even if they're a bit more kind of complicated by regional differences. And I think that what I would hope a responsible Conservative leader will do is figure out how to kind of maybe tap into that, but also kind of keep a lid on the darker sides of this, the more dangerous sides of it, right? I think in a column during the election there was I think it was John Ibbotson referred to it as kind of responsible populism or serious populism. If such a thing is possible, I think that's probably what I would hope the next leader at least tries to do to kind of take advantage of this movement or recognize the reality of this movement without letting it kind of hijack the party and the movement itself.
It's been hard to see, and I want to say this carefully because I know that there's a lot of people that are part of this at the truckers' convoy who aren't bigots, who are upset with the mandates. They might have lost their jobs. I have 2 kids, and trying to navigate 2 years at home has been really, really challenging. So there's a lot of people who are upset with the mandates, who are upset about the lockdowns, but they're not part of this convoy. And if you're watching this and you're seeing all of this happening and the interim leader meeting with people who are holding up flags with hate, with swastikas, Confederate flags, you might wonder, where does a pragmatic centrist conservative go? Tasha?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that was something that was a missed opportunity at this protest to call that out on the spot. I've said it before. I thought that Mr. O'Toole shouldn't have been absent. I thought he should have addressed that crowd and said, to your point, that there are a lot of good people here who are legitimately frustrated, upset. They just don't know what to do with themselves. They just want to make their voice heard. But, you over there with the Confederate flag, you're not welcome. Like, get out, go away. That's not what this is. But no one did that. And, protesters were walking with other protesters who had those hateful things. And I don't think anyone, at least I certainly didn't see anyone, reported or confronting them saying, take that away. So that's the problem. It's like guilt by association. I 100% agree with you. It's not the overwhelming number of people. And most of the people have left. What's left in Ottawa, and Ben probably knows it more than we do because he's on ground zero, are people who've dug in really for a hardcore, we're going to stay here. They've raised all this money. It is taking on a very disturbing turn. I think the Conservatives have to be very careful about this because they are also the party of law and order. That is part of the Conservative tradition. Yep. Freedom, free speech, free expression, absolutely. But this is not what that is. The expression's been had. And if you cast your mind back 2 years ago to the protests the Wet'suwet'en had, which were, across the country, frankly, at different rail points and things like that, they had a very different tone about that. So you got to wonder here, if they're seen as agreeing too much with what's going on, and it takes a very dark turn, as Ben said, or I think you just said, they will pay for that association. So I think they really have to be careful trying to, pin this all in the lap of the Prime Minister or say, oh, yeah, you deal with it now. No. All politicians have to be responsible here.
And Ben?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I think we all hope this dissipates by itself, and it does so in a peaceful way. But the longer this goes on, the more I think we've referenced Matt Gurney already. I think it was Gurney who mentioned last week that the longer this goes on, it's the hardcore people that will get left. There's a lot of genuinely very angry and very frustrated people out there right now, and it's understandable, right? I think everyone is frustrated right now. And so this convoy appears to have tapped into that kind of anger. But again, the Conservatives themselves have to be very careful with what I think there can be legitimate grievances that they share, that they sympathize with. They've got to be clear. They've got to be extremely firm and clear. And these are the things that we think are concerns, and these are the things that we think are legitimate grievances. These are the things that we think are unacceptable and we condemn. Right. So much of this problem stems from just kind of confused, mixed messaging. Right. Be clear and be assertive. Tell people what you support. Tell people what you think, and tell people, most importantly, what you don't support and what you don't think.
Ben and Tasha, thank you so much for your time. I know we're going to come back to this over the next little while. Before we go, though, Tasha, I understand you're writing a book about the future of the Conservative Party. So the timing for you, I'm sure you're not going to sleep for a long time. Can you give us 30 seconds of what you're working on?
Sure. The working title is The Right Path, How Conservatives Can Unite, Inspire, and Take Canada Forward. And I started working on this well before this happened. In fact, just after the election, I was inspired to start thinking about this project. And this is exactly what I'd like to do, is advance some ideas that could help whoever leads the party and wherever the party goes next to really do those things and to be a force for good, a positive force for change, and hopefully a government in waiting hold the Liberals to account. So there we go.
Well, Tasha and Ben, thank you so much. And I know you will have you back, Tasha, when the book comes out. Take good care.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.